So today we're going to build a full stack Nextjs application using Prisma and PostgresQL as our ORM and database. So here what we have is a simple volunteer management tracker. Just a little simple project that I wanted to practice on leading up to a larger project that I'm working on. But what we have is the ability to enter a project name. So we'll create a project named Downtown Cleaning. And once we create it, we see that we're automatically redirected to the Downtown Cleaning page. And you can see that based on the localhost/project/ID. And on this page, we can go back to the project page. And here we now see that we have a project listed on our screen. When we click back on it, we're redirected back to the single project management page. Here we have the ability to update the project name if we wanted to. So I can add an S and I can remove this R. And if we click this plus button, we'll see that it is now updated. And if I refresh the page, you see that it is now showing the S. We also have the ability to delete this project, but I'm not going to delete it just yet. Here we have the ability to add volunteers to our project. So let's just say that we want to add someone as a volunteer. So I'm going to go Jace, and I'll remove the autocomplete and go jace@gmail.com. And I'll just put 109s in as the phone number. And once I click add volunteer, you're going to see that we're redirected back to the main project page. But if we click on the project within our project window or project list, we'll see that we now have Jace as a volunteer listed, and we can see the name, the email, and the phone number. And we have the ability to delete this one as well. So if this is something that you think you may be interested in building, just stay tuned, and I'm going to walk you through how I built this project using the tech stack mentioned before. So we'll close this out, and I'm going to close that out. So what I have now is a directory on my desktop, and I'm going to be using VS Code. So within it, we're going to open up the terminal, and we're going to create a Nextjs project, and we'll do so by using npx create next app at latest. And I'm going to install it in this directory. So I'll use space and a dot and press enter. And we will not be using TypeScript. Yes to ESLint. Then we'll say yes to Tailwind, no to the SRC, yes to the app router, and no to the import alias. And we'll give it a few moments to finish installing. And while we're waiting on it, let's go ahead and we're going to use nextui to help us with a little bit of a style. That way we don't have to do so much, spend so much time on the styling. So we'll go ahead and work on getting that pulled up while this is installing. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and we'll install the nextui package. And I'm also going to add next themes, which is going to allow me to take advantage of a feature within nextui. And we'll also go ahead and install React icons so that we'll have the ability to use some icons in places that we choose. And this will take a few moments to install, so we'll go ahead and press enter. And while we're waiting on this to install, let's go ahead and begin to clean up our app a little bit. So let's remove all of the code from our page.js file, and we're going to add a new function component, and we'll just name it home page. And you can name it anything you want, but I'm just going to keep it as home page for now, and or a home page in general. And in the global.css, let's remove the boiler code within it. And I'm going to add the overflow X to be hidden, and we'll click save. And it appears that our installation is complete. So now the next thing we can go ahead and do, let's just make sure that our app is functioning properly. So we'll go ahead, well, before we do that, let's go ahead and add a few things to get us set up. So first, let's go to the .getignore file, and we want to add our .env file to it. That way, when we upload this to GitHub, our personal information will be stored with this protected. So we'll add .env and save the file. And within the root directory, we'll go ahead and add a file named .env. And this is where we're going to store our environment variables. Excuse me. And while we're here, we can go ahead and add in our database models, and our ORM for this project is going to be Prisma. So in your terminal, go ahead and type in clear so we can go back to the top, so that we can remove the prior code that we typed in. And then let's type in the command npm -d, and then we'll type Prisma and press enter. And then the next command will be npm at prisma /client, CLIENT, and then press enter. Then we're going to type in the command npx prisma init and press enter. Helps if I spell it correctly. So sorry about that. Okay. And we see that we now have a Prisma directory and a schema.prisma file within it. And before we update our models, or before we create our models, let's go ahead and set up our database. And as I mentioned, we're going to use PostgresQL database. I'm going to use Versal because we may deploy this project at the end. So once you've logged in, I went ahead and set up a pro account, but you can also create a free account. They do give you a database to use and deploy, so you can certainly take advantage of this at no cost. But what we want to do next is click on Create Database, and we're going to create a Postgres database, and we'll click Accept. And just go ahead and name it. I'm going to name mine. I'm going to name it Vol Track, and I'll click Create. And what we need from this window is under the tab, the .env.local, go ahead and click on Show Secret, and let's copy this snippet, and let's go back to our .env file, and we can highlight and delete this database, and let's paste in the information that we just copied, and we can go ahead and close out this .env file now. Let's go back to the Vercel page, and let's click on Prisma, and we want to copy the code. We want to copy this code snippet here. And once we've done this, we can go ahead and minimize the Vercel page for now. And let's go to the schema.prisma file, and the database, the data source database. We can highlight it, and let's paste in the code that we just copied. If you save the file, now we should have our database provider updated, and also pointing to the correct URL and the correct direct URL to our database. So now what we'll want to do is create the models that will be organizing the data within our database. And we're going to have two models. The first one is going to be called project. And this is going to represent the project that will be, this is going to represent the project that's going to store the user's information that volunteers for each project. So we want to have a ID, and we're going to have it as a string, and we'll also include the @ symbol, and we'll say ID, and we'll go at default, and within it we want to pass in CUID, and from there, next we want to have a name for our project, and we're going to have it be a string, and we'll include created at. Helps if I tab down, we'll create it at, and this will be date time at default, and inside of it we'll pass in now so that it captures the time that we created it as now. We're going to include update at, and this is going to be date time, and we'll go at update it at. Okay, and we're going to have one more item within our project model. It's going to be the volunteers. We want to have our volunteers stored within the project. That way we'll be able to retrieve the information once we click on the project name. So I'm going to go ahead and create a model named volunteer. And I actually can just copy the ID and name from project and paste it in under volunteer. And then underneath it, I'll add email, and it will be a string. We're going to include a phone, and it will be a string as well. We'll have the project ID, which is going to refer to this ID. And we want it to be a string because that's what it will be stored as. And underneath it, we're going to include project, and we want it to relate to the project model. And we're going to say at relation fields, we want the project ID, and we want it to reference REFERENCE references. We want to pass in we want it to reference this ID, and then on delete, if we delete this volunteer, we want it to cascade and also delete within the project. Now you could store this information or keep it. That way you can have it for your historical records, and you could have just logged it. But since this is just a simple CRUD project, I don't want to make this too complicated. But we're getting this error because we currently don't have the relation between project and volunteer that we need in order to store the volunteer within the project. So in order to correct this, I'm just going to include a field a field within the project named volunteers. And it's going to store the volunteer model, and we're just going to pass it or give it an assignment of an empty array. That way we can store more than one volunteer within this item or within this project. So with this updated, now we can go ahead and save this file, and we shouldn't need our schema.prisma file anymore. Next, within the root directory, let's add a folder named lib, and we're going to include a file named prisma.js. And what we want to accomplish within this file is the ability to connect the Prisma. And we want to make sure that we want to make sure that we have a function that's going to allow us to connect the Prisma. And we also want to check and make sure that it is not repeating the connection and that it is disconnecting when appropriate. I'm going to go ahead and copy this code directly from the prior project. You can copy it as well from the Prisma documentation if you want to, but I figured since I already have it up and we want to make sure we get this function correct, I can just copy it real quick and then we can move on. So now that we have this saved, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and migrate or push our model into our Prisma or into our database. So what we'll do is within the terminal, we'll go ahead and type in the command npx prisma db push. And we'll just pay attention to make sure that we don't get any errors. And everything says that it was synced and we got the message of done. Now the next command we want to type in is npx prisma generate, and then we'll press enter. Okay, and we didn't get any errors once we typed it in as well, so we should be good to go with the setup of Prisma and our PostgreSQL database. So now let's go ahead and spin up our Nextjs project, and let's type in the command npm run dev. And then within our browser window, I'll go ahead and go to localhost 3000 so we can make sure that we get a homepage message. And as you can see, we have the homepage message displayed successfully. So with that set up, I think the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and add in our nextui so that we could begin some styling and integration of our functionality within the project. So since we already have nextui set up, let's go ahead and go to the documents, and as you can see, we'll need to update the tailwind.config file. So I'm going to add in this information, and we'll need to include the plugin. And I also want to have some consistent colors within the project. So I'm going to remove the background code, and I'm going to add colors. And I'm going to have a primary. I want to have a primary. And this is totally optional. 583E23, I believe it is. And we'll have a secondary color. It's going to be £736,838. And we'll also have a light gray color, and it will be £E9 E6FF. And we'll save the file. So that will give us some styling and give us access to the Next themes functionality based on the docs. So we can close this file out. Now we'll need to wrap our application with the provider. Because we are using Nextjs and we'll be keeping our application running as much as we can on the server, I'm not going to import this directly into the layout. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import it into a file within the application, because it is a client-side. This is client-side functionality. This isn't anything that'll run on the server. So I'm going to create a theme provider file. So we'll inside of the lib directory. So I'm going to call it nextthemeprovider.js, and then this is going to be a client file. And what we want is to import theme provider as next themes provider. And I probably should have named that something a little different, because it is pretty close and it's easy to get mixed up. And if you get mixed up, it could be a pain to correct. But we'll just go ahead and keep it moving and make sure that we don't mess up, so we don't have to worry about correcting it if need be. And this is going to be next theme provider, not themes as it's suggesting. And then of course we want to pass in the children, and inside of it we're going to return excuse me, next themes provider, what we just imported. And within it is we're going to pass in the children, and we'll also need to go attribute of class, and we'll go enable system. So now let's save this file, and we'll go to our layout.js file. And within it, what we want to do is wrap our application with the next theme provider that we just brought in, as it's suggesting here. So we'll just copy the children, and we'll type the bracket, and we'll go next theme, and as you can see, it is listed here. And then we'll paste in the children, that way our application is wrapped, and we'll test this out just to make sure that it is working properly. So we're going to save this and we'll close out the layout and the next theme provider file. Excuse me. And within the app, let's organize this a little bit. Even though this is a simple application, I still like to keep things fairly organized. So within the app directory, let's create a new folder named open bracket, and I'm going to name it website. And I'm going to go close parentheses. Excuse me, I said bracket, but it's actually open parentheses, website, close parentheses, and press enter. And then I'm just going to drag this page.js file within the website folder. And yes, we want to move it. And just to make sure that the next UI is working properly, underneath the word homepage, let's type the the less than sign, capital B. And what you should see after you've typed in TT is that we have the nextui-org as an option to be imported. If you click on it and then close out the button and then just say hello world within the button, click save. And if we go back to our localhost 3000 and refresh the page, let's see, it's a little tough to see. Class of flex. And let's go flex column. So it doesn't seem like it brought in, let me see something. Oh, I know what I missed. This. Save it. There we go. All right, so now you see we have the next, sorry about that, with the next UI button. So it is working properly. So we can go ahead and close out this tailwind config file, and let's remove this button, and we'll just have it remain with the word homepage on the screen for right now. So now that we have this updated, let's begin to set up the layout of our website. So the first thing we'll want to do is, now that we have our homepage, and this will be the main page of the site, we're not going to include any authentication in this particular project, but you could always add Next, Auth, Clerk, or any of the other authentication providers. It's fairly simple. But what we're going to have is on the home page just a header text with a message to the user, a simple description, and also a input for the user to create a project. And we also want to display a message in the event there are no projects, asking the user to simply create a project by typing in a project name above. So we'll begin to style this first, and once we style it, we'll start to kind of build out some more of our layout. So the first thing that we want to do with our layout is within the website directory, let's add a file named layout.js. And within this layout, this is going to be a special layout that we're going to use to style the layout of our website. We could have used this initial layout, but I just like to keep this strictly to imports and have a second layout that'll include the styling. Personal preference, nothing important to the project. And within the layout.js file, what we want to do is use the RFCE template to create this layout component. And then we want to pass in within the function curly braces for JavaScript, and we want to include the word children. Then we'll remove the word layout within our divs, and we'll type in children. That way it's passing in the children, and you can see the home page is back on our page. Now within the website directory, let's go ahead and include a folder named project. And this is going to be what we have to hold our individual project once we click on it from the home page. And I'm going to go ahead and dynamically pass in the ID. And the way we dynamically pass routes in Next.js is by including the open bracket, and then we'll type ID and then close bracket. And then within the project ID directory, we'll include a file named page.js. And just to have something on our page, we're going to type the React functional snippet with VS Code, and we're going to name this function single project, and then we'll save it. And then let's just test it out to make sure that it's working. So with our local host, if we type in /project, and we can use the same project ID that it is remembering from before. If we press enter, it's going to read bad request. Let me see something. Let me see. I should have. There we go. Sorry about that. I had a character that wasn't recognized. But if you type in if you type in localhost /project/1, you're going to see that it's going to take you to the single project page. That's just the routing capability of Next.js. And we could change this project number to 17 to 1. It's going to automatically route because this ID is dynamic. So that's the basic layout of our project. So now we can begin to do some styling to bring it to life. So we'll start by styling our layout. And the only thing that we're going to need within this layout directory is a header. And you can create a component directory and have all of the components for each page within the layout, within the website folder, but I'm just going to have it in its own directory for this project. So in the root directory, let's click so that we're back in it, and we're going to add a folder named components. And inside of it, we're going to add a file named header.js. And we want to get our header on the screen. So for right now, we're just going to create a simple component or function and make sure that we have it capitalized. We'll click save and go to our layout, and we're going to bring that header in. And once we bring the header in, we're going to see it now being displayed on our page. So we now have the header within our window. So we don't have much styling. We can go ahead and close out the layout.js file. We're not going to have much styling. If you recall, the only thing that we really had, for our header was basically just the text at the top of the window, welcoming the user to our page. So we'll go ahead and use that. We'll go ahead and begin to type that out now, so it won't be much to include. Sorry about that. So I'm going to remove the div listed within header, and I'm going to use the header tag. And within header, I'm going to give it a class name of container, and we'll give some padding on the X of 5, on the Y of 24, and we'll go MX auto to center all of our content. And I'm going to type header just so you can see what it is doing. And once I save it, you'll see that it now gives us padding on the X, padding on the Y, and it is centered versus having the content basically on one side of the page. Now I'm going to remove header and I'm going to replace it with a div. And inside of our div, we'll give it a class name of flex. We'll set the direction to column. We want the text to be centered and we want it to take up the full width of the container. And since I don't have anything typed in, you didn't see the minor adjustment, but now the text is centered versus it being to the left. And first up is a H1, which is going to represent the title. And our H1 is going to be just volunteer management made easy. Volunteer management made easy. And click save. And now you see we have this on the page as our header. Now within the H1, I'm going to include a class name and I'm going to give it some styling. And on small windows, we want the text to be 3XL. On larger windows, we want it to be, it'd be text 3XL. Then we want the text on normal size or large windows to be 5XL. We'll put the font to be medium. And we'll go margin bottom of 4. And we'll set the text to gray. And we'll set it to 900. And let's save it. And now you see that is the updated version. I'm going to go tracking and I'm going to go tighter. Yep. And now underneath the H1, we're going to have a description. And it will be effortless. I think it effortless coordinates track and manage. That I have your volunteers. With our intuitive online platform. And that should be enough. I may include some more text and then we'll give it a class name as well. And we'll say on large, or we can go medium. Medium would be better. Let's set the width to be 2/3. And we'll go MX auto, leading, relaxed. Text is going to be base. And the reason we use this is to set the width so that it is taking up a certain amount of our viewport on the window. And the rest of that is just some styling to bring it, to give it a little bit of life. So now that we have our header updated, next we want to move on to the home page. And our home page, if you recall, is going to have the message to the user to say, hey, let's go ahead and sign up on our page. And you could begin by storing or adding a project, below. So on the home page, we can remove this button. And we'll go ahead and set this to be an asynchronous function. And we'll come back and we'll query our database for projects, but for right now we'll just go ahead and set it as an asynchronous function. And within the return statement, let's remove this div and let's update the tag to be main. And we'll add a class name and we'll go flex items center. We'll go justify between to give some space in between the items. We'll go padding of the X of 24. And we'll set the direction to column. And we'll say home page. And I just realized we're on the single page. So let me go to a new tab. Okay. So now we see the content listed here and there's some space between the two. We'll leave it as is. Let's remove this and we'll add a H1. And within it, we'll go add project. Add a project below. And the H1, we're going to style it. We'll go text of 3XL. And on medium, we'll go 5XL to keep it consistent with this title. And I could have made this a reusable component. But for this project, I'm not going to. I'll keep it simple. And we'll go font of bold. And let's go save, see what it looks like. And yep, add a project below. And underneath it, let's add a span. Enter your project name. And click save. Yep. And then underneath this span, let's add a div. And inside of this div, we're going to have a form that'll have a row layout, and it'll be basically a input and a button. So we'll go within the div, we'll add a form, and this form will have an action, but I'm not going to include the action just yet. But we'll go ahead and add a class name, and we'll set it to flex, and we'll go flex. We'll go flex column. I won't go row. We'll go flex column. And we'll go on medium devices. We want to set the width to, let's go 1000 pixels. And let's just to see what this looks like, we're going to type in underneath the form closing tag, but in between form, let's bring in or type a input and with a capital I. And you should see that you now have the ability to import the input from nextui-org. So we'll go ahead and bring it in, include the closing input tag. We'll go placeholder, and this is going to be the placeholder for name. So we'll click save, and we see, yes, we see that this is what we have listed here. And now next we want to have I think I want to have a little down arrow pointing at this input for this project. So let's go ahead and bring in a React icon. So we're going to type import, and we'll go from React icons, and I'm going to use the FI icon. And this is just to give it a little bit of styling. And we'll go FI arrow down, and then inside of the form tag above the input, let's go FI arrow, and we'll bring it in and we'll use it here. And then we'll include the closing tag for our icon, and we'll give it a class name of flex, and we'll go item center. We'll give it a width of full, margin top of 4. We'll go margin top of 2, margin bottom of 2 as well. And we'll click save, and you see the icon listed there. Now what we need is the button listed next to this input so that we have the ability to add the project name by pressing the button. So in order to have it listed there, let's bring in the button from nextui, and within the button, let's add the FI icon of plus. And the way you bring it in is by typing in capital F I after you brought in a less than bracket or less than symbol, and then you should have the ability to start to see the React icons, and then you type capital P LU and it'll get you the plus. And we'll go ahead and close this tag out, click save, and you see that we have the button listed right there. So like I said, I think I want this to be next to the input, so let me see, class of flex. No, because this is within the actual within the button. So here's what we want to do. Let's do this. Let's remove this class name from here, and let's copy this button and input and delete it, and let's bring in a div. Let's paste the input and button back inside of that div, and then let's click on, or let's add a class name to the div that we just created, a flex. Then once we save it, now we see that we have the plus button next to the input that we just created. So we can style our button a little bit. So let's give it a class name, and we'll go hover bg primary, and we'll go 50. Click save. So now you see we get a hover effect once we hover over the button. And I think I want to include some styling from nextui, and I want to use this option. So I'm going to go with is icon only, and the color will be warning, and variant is faded. Click save, and let's go back, and we see that we have the button with the hover effect. So now that we have our project page set up, what we want to do next is have the ability to create a project. And for this project, we're going to be using server actions in order to create a project. So inside of our root directory, let's create a new folder named actions. And inside of it, let's create a file named createproject.js. Now within this folder, we're going to store the ability to, as the file name suggests, create a project. And we want to have the ability to use the model that we created earlier. So because we're using server actions, in order to make sure that in order to utilize that capability, we have to use the use server notation. So I'm going to set it at the top of the file, but you can also put it within the function. It'll work just fine that way as well. And inside of this, I'm going to bring in a few imports. The first one is going to be Prisma. And just be sure that you import it from the lib directory that we created earlier. That's going to give us access to that function. The next is going to be import. The first one is going to be revalidate path. And we want to make sure that we're bringing in the one from nextcache. And we also want to have the ability to redirect, and just make sure you're bringing in the redirect with the lowercase r from next navigation. And then inside, after we brought in those imports, we want to create a asynchronous function. Export async function, and we're going to name this function create project. And I want to pass in form data within the project. And that form data is going to come from the form that we just created. And inside of this function, I want to start by creating a variable named new project. And we'll have a try catch block in the event we get an error. And inside of the try catch, we want to have a variable that captures the input from the form that we're creating, and the input that we have within our form is called name. So I'm going to create a variable named name, not new, and we're going to go with form data.get, and what we want to get is the input that's named name, and we're going to include that once we go back to our form. And then underneath that variable named name, let's create a new variable named new project. And we want to set it equal to await. And we want to await the Prisma variable that we just, the Prisma function that we just destructured. And we're going to go Prisma.project because we're going to be accessing the project model. and we want to go with .create, because what we want to do is we want to create a new project, and the data that we're going to pass to it is of course name, because that's what we're getting from the form. And then we're not going to return anything, but if we get an error, we do want to throw a new error. Actually, what I want to do is I want to console.log the error, and we'll just type in error, and I'm going to make sure we have visibility to our terminal. So we'll just bring it up right here. That way, if we get an error, we can troubleshoot or dissect that error. Okay. And now, once we've created that project, I want to utilize the revalidate path, and I want to revalidate the page dynamically. So I'm going to use the temporal literal. So we'll go with /project /new. No, it is $ brackets, and then we're going to pass in new project, and we want to access the ID, and we can actually just copy this because this is the same site we want to be redirected to, and we'll use redirect, and we're going to pass in the project, the new project ID. So now what we want to do is we want to test this out to make sure that it works, and we can just go with first project, and we can click, and if this works, we should be, no, it won't work because we haven't included it in our form data just yet. So what we want to do in order to make sure that we're passing this information, we'll go with inside of the input, we'll start there. We're going to give it an ID of name. We're also going to include the name of this input to be name, and we'll save the file. And the next thing and the most important thing that we include is the action. So we'll go to the form, and we'll include action within form, and then we'll use the curly brackets so that we can dynamically pass in, or not dynamically, but so that we can pass in the action that we just created. So we'll go with create project. Yes, create project, and you can see it's the one that comes from action/create-project. And once you click on that, it should be imported at the top. We'll just click save and give it a once over on our file just to make sure it looks good. But we have our action, we have our input, and we can include the type just to make sure. Typically, you want to make sure that you are doing validations, and I will start doing that in future projects. But this is just a simple CRUD project. But in the future, we'll probably use like React Hook Form and Zod or Yelp to help validate the data that we're sending to, or update the data that we're sending to the database. But for the input, we're going to include the type, the text, and with our button, we're going to say type submit. Once we save the file, let's go back to our window, and if we click on first project, you see that we're redirected to the project URL. Well, excuse me, we're redirected to the single project page, and if you look at the URL, it is now project, and it is a string. That's an ID. So just to make sure that this saved properly, if we go to our database and we click on storage, and we click on the database that we just created and scroll down to data, we're going to see our table listed here. If we click on choose a table and click on project, we're going to see the first project that we just created. So we see that is now communicating with our database. So now what we want is the ability to actually see this information that we just created on the page that's in our browser, displayed on the window. And the way we'll do so is just simply by using the params option and bringing it into the page. So for right now, let's just go ahead and save this, and this page.js file, we're going to come back to it. The create project function that we created, we can close it out. We should be done with it for now. And then now inside of our root directory, let's go to the app folder. Inside of our website directory, we should have a directory named project, and then in it we'll have ID, and then we'll have page.js. And what we want to do is, we want to get access to the project ID that is within our localhost URL. And the way that we do so is we're going to use the params option in order to get access. So we're going to pass in params. And inside of params, or inside of this single project function, let's type in const ID, and we want to get access to params, and we'll set it equal to params.id, and let's just go ahead and make this a asynchronous function, because we'll need to use await in order to capture to fetch the project ID by ID. So to make sure that we are getting the ID passed in, we're going to go console.log ID, and then we'll go outside of the parentheses a plus mark and give it a little bit of space. And if we save this file and look in our database, or look in the console, you're going to see this project ID listed. So we see that it is being passed in as we wish. So we can remove it just to keep our console fairly clean. And now we want to use this ID to grab the projects that have this ID. So we're going to create a variable named data, and we'll set it equal to await. And we want to use prisma as the function that we created earlier in order to access our database. So we'll go prisma and we want to use the project model, and then we'll say find unique, because we want to find the unique ID that we are going to pass into it. So we'll say where the ID is equal to ID. And for right now, we can go ahead and include it, even though we're not going to access it just yet. Let's go with include. What we want to include is volunteers, and we'll say true. That way we'll go ahead and get access to it, even though we're not going to use it just yet. But in order to make sure that the data is being passed in properly, I just want to display the volunteer onto the page. So in order to capture it, I'm going to just say data.name, save the file, and you see first project is listed there. So we are getting the project data being passed to this component, and we're able to render the individual project information onto the page. But the challenge or the issue that we're we don't have, if we go back to our home page, we don't have the ability to see the projects that's in our database in order to click on a project and access the volunteers within it. So let's go ahead and add the ability to see our projects listed on our home page. So back in the root directory, let's go to the app directory, and inside of app we're going to go to the website folder, and then we're going to click on the page.js. And within this page we want to get access to see all of the projects that's within our database so they could be displayed on our window. Excuse me, sip of water there. So first, let's go ahead and create a variable to get access to our projects. So we're going to go const projects is equal to await, and we're going to go prisma.project, and we're going to go .find many, and I'm just going to leave it like that for right now. We could pass in something unique. We could to set the order or anything else if we just want to capture certain projects, but I'm just going to leave it as is for now. We can always come back to it. And what I want to do now is I want to render the projects underneath the form just to make sure, or excuse me, that this is in the right place. Okay, we see that we have projects listed here. So what we want to do now is we want to render our projects in a grid layout underneath this form so that every time they're added, they'll just appear in a grid layout listed here. So underneath this closing div that's right below the closing form, we want to add another div and give it a class name. And inside of it, we're going to name or give it a class name of grid. And on small devices, we want to have 2 columns. On medium devices, we want to have 4. We're going to set the gap to give it a little bit of spacing of 4. We want the width to be set to full, and we'll give it a little bit of margin top. I'll set that to 4. Let's save the file. And just to see what this looks like, let's go ahead and render out our projects. So we'll go projects, and this is we want to render the projects that we gain access to listed here. And just to make sure that we're getting them, if we go console.log projects and save the file, we'll see we have 2 objects listed here. So that lets us know that we do have access to those objects. Remember, that's how they are being returned to us coming from the form. So we'll save the file. That's right. Let me go projects. Hold on. Okay. Let's go projects.map. And within the projects, for each one, we want to name it project. And then we'll set the arrow there. And I'll just pass in a link. And make sure you set link with a capital L, and be sure to import your link from next/link. And every link has to have an href. So we'll go href, and we're going to dynamically pass in the project ID, because that's how we're going to get to the page, the single project page. So we'll go project.id. And then outside of the href, let's just go ahead and add the closing tag for right now. And that should close off the link. And within it, I'm going to dynamically pass in, or excuse me, I'm going to pass in the project.name. And if we save the file, we see that we have first project listed here. And if we click on it, you see that we go to the single project page, and it has first project listed there. So I'm going to go back. And let's just add a little bit of styling to our project link. So I'm going to give it a class name and a padding of 4. And I'm going to set the background to, let's go primary 200. And on hover, well, let's save it just to see what that looks like first. Okay. And then on hover, I'm going to go background, primary, let's go 60, 70. We see that it does change a little. Okay. And now we'll set cursor to pointer, and I'm going to round the borders just a little bit to keep it consistent. And you see we have a little bit of rounding there. Let's go extra large. There we go. Okay. All right. Let's put that 200. And let's go text white. Okay. That looks a little better. All right, and that should take care of everything that we want on our home page. So now we'll transition to styling the single project page. So we can close out the website, or excuse me, the page.js that's located immediately within the website directory. And we'll shift our focus to the page.js. We have quite a bit that'll be going on with this page.js file. So first thing we want to do is we can remove the single project so that all we see is the project name. And I think what we want to do first is let's go ahead and style this layout. So I'm going to remove this div tag, excuse me, and replace it with the main. And we'll give it a class name of flex. We'll go item centered. We'll go justify between, padding on the X of 6, and set the direction to column. And if we save it, we see that we lose the text, but that's okay. Let's just go with hi there. Save it, and we see that it is now centered. So now what I want is a nav bar that will have the ability to go back to the home page if you click the back arrow. And I also want the ability to delete and update the project name or the project in general if you click on the project name or a trash icon. So I think we'll go ahead and work on building out our nav bar first. So in order to kind of help with the styling, I'm going to use the nextui nav bar, excuse me, in order to kind of help bring this to life a little bit. And let's go back to our main tag, and we'll go with navbar, and let's import it from nextui. And inside of it, we'll give it a class name of flex, set the items to be centered. That way they are centered on the axis. And next we want to have the content for our navbar. And the first content I want is a link, and this link is going to navigate us back to the home page. So we'll import navbar content first, then inside of it we'll bring in link, and of course the link will need a href, and we're going to point it back to the home page. And let's give a class name to our link of flex. Then let's go item centered. And if we close off the link, we now will have the ability to include text or items within our link. So I'm going to go with a React icon of a back arrow. So we'll go import from React icons. We want the FI icon. And I'm going to go with arrow. I think it's arrow left. Yes, I think it's arrow left. We'll save it. And then inside of this, we'll bring in that arrow left. And I'm going to go give it a size of 20, a closing tag. And we see it listed on the screen. And I'll have a span, and we'll type back. Okay. And now you can see we go back, and you see it works just fine. Okay. And next I want to have the title displayed, but I'm going to display it in a form so that you have the ability to update the title name if you would like. And that'll be the U of our CRUD application. So I'm going to go navbar content, and I'm going to create a form. And in the form, I want the direction to be flex, and it's going to be flex row. So I'm just going to type flex. We're going to need a input. we're going to need two inputs. The first one is going to be the ID that we want to pass into the form, or the ID of the project that we'll be working with. So we'll just type input and we'll give it a default value of data. That's default check. Default value. And we'll go with data.id. And this doesn't need to be visible, so I'm going to include hidden inside of the input, and be sure to set the name to ID and include the closing tag. So you're not going to see anything just yet because we have this hidden, but if we remove the hidden word, we're going to see the ID listed here in the input, so that's perfect. So I'm going to do Control Z to bring it back. And underneath this input, now we want the input that's going to be visible to the user. So we're going to bring in a input with a capital I, and be sure to import it from nextui. And we'll include the closing tag for the input, and we'll just give it a default value of data.name. And let's give it a name of name and an ID of name. Excuse me. And if we save it, we see that we have first project listed here. And that looks a little off, but I'll wait. I'm not going to worry about it right now. We'll fix the styling of this in a moment. And we'll also include the button to submit this project if we need to change it. So underneath that closing input tag, let's bring in a button with a capital B, and be sure to import it from next-org. And then inside of the button, I want to have the FI plus React icon, and let's give it a closing tag. And if we just save it, we're going to see the button visible here. But let's give it a little bit of styling. I'm going to go with a type of submit. We'll give it a class name hover. The background will be primary. Let's go with /70. No, we'll go with 50. And we'll go with is icon only. Color will be warning, and variant will be faded. If we save it, we see we have the same button that we had before. Hover, I think it's this. Yeah. And then let's go with 70. There we go. All right. And last but not least, I want to have the ability to delete this project. So I'm going to include a React trash icon to represent it. But first, let's center this content. So we'll take advantage of the function within the nextui by using justify, and we'll type center. And if we save it, we see it shifted to the right. But underneath the closing navbar content tag, let's add another tag, and then let's add justify end on this one. And we'll just type in trash for right now, save it. And you see it's now centered, and the trash can will be to the far right. So we can remove this trash icon for right now, and we'll go ahead and add in the form for delete. So let's go with form, and let's give it a, well, we won't do the action. I don't think we're going to need a class name on this one, but what we will need is the input value, the input value. We'll need the input of the data ID that we had with the name for the edit that we're going to include earlier. We can just copy it and include it for delete because it's going to be the exact same input. But don't put it inside of the form tag like I did. Be sure to put it within the opening and closing of form. And then inside of this form, we're going to have a button. And inside of the button, we're going to include a React FI icon of trash. And we can just give this a size. No, we didn't have a size, so we'll just give it a closing tag. And since we didn't size this button, I'm going to keep it consistent. So let's just save it. And you see we now have the trash icon. Well, I'll tell you what, we may need to make it a little bigger. Let's go with size of 25 maybe. That'll work. And in the button, let's keep this button as a low. I just realized it was a lowercase button, but let's just keep it as a lowercase button. This is fine. Let's just include the type to be submit, and let's give it a class name of hover text. Let's go red and 500. And if we save this, we see that we get a little hover effect when we hover over this button. So now what we want, number one, is two things. We want the ability to update this project once we click on the submit button. And we also want the ability to delete this project once we click on the trash button. So we'll work on the the update functionality first. So within our root directory, let's go back to the directory named actions. And inside of it, let's add a file name called updateproject.js. And then inside of it, we want to set the use server up top. And we'll go ahead and we can actually copy the exact same import from the create project because that's pretty much the same. And then what we want to do is create we don't need two use servers. We want to create a function called export async function, update project. And we want to pass in form data. And we'll create a variable named let update project. And we'll have a try catch block. And inside of this try catch block, we want to capture two pieces of information. The first one that we're passing from the form is going to be the ID, and the second one is going to be the name. Second one's going to be the name. Okay, and sorry about that. Needed to step away for just a moment. So we'll go with const ID is equal to form data dot get, and we want to get the ID, and we'll go const name is equal to form data dot get. And what we want to get is the name. And these are going to be passed from the form that we have created here. And we're going to add this function to the form within the action of that. This is going to be the action within that form, excuse me. And now we want to create a variable to use the ID to capture the project that has the corresponding ID. So we'll create the variable name existing ng project. We'll set it equal to await, and we'll go prisma dot project, and we want to find unique, unique, and we want to go with where ID is equal to ID. All right, and we'll hit save, and then we'll also want to include capturing that ID, capturing this existing project and then updating it once we've identified it. But if we can't find it, we want to make sure we throw a new error. So we'll go existing. If the existing project does not exist, we want to throw new error, project. Let's go project not found. Ooh, can't type today. Okay, but if we do find a project, then we want to go with updated, a variable name updated project. It's going to be equal to await prisma.project.update, and that is a operation available to us from Prisma. And we'll go with where ID and and underneath this where bracket, we want to type in another object of data, and we'll go with data, and we want to pass in the name. And then if we get a error, I'm gonna go console.log error. And then now I want to take advantage of the revalidate path, and we're going to just stay on this same page. So we'll go /project/updated project.id, and I'll copy this, and then we'll go, probably doesn't need redirect, but I'm going to include it anyway. And then now we'll go back to our page.js file, and inside of the form we'll pass in the action that we just created, and the name of it is update project. Let's include it as the action. Click save. Let's refresh our page, and we'll just add a S, and let's click save. And if we refresh the page, we see that it is now first projects, and we'll go with updated, and we'll click save, and let's just go back to the home page. We see it now reads updated projects, and excuse me, let's go back to the single product page, and let's work on the delete functionality. So what we'll want to do first is create the action. So inside of the actions folder that we were just in, we can close out the update project, and we can also, we'll leave one open because we'll just go ahead and copy this create project. We'll copy the imports from create project, excuse me, because we're going to need them in just a moment, and we can close out create projects. And inside of actions, let's create a file named delete project.js, and we'll paste in our imports first. Then we'll create a function named export async function delete project. Let's go with form data, and we'll have a try catch block, and this one's going to be really simple. We're only passing in the ID, so we'll go const ID is equal to form data dot get, and of course we want to get the ID, and we'll go await prisma dot project. I can type project dot delete. It has been a long day, car messed up, and we're going to look for where the ID And this one should be pretty straightforward. So we'll just go console.log error. And then we'll go revalidate path. We'll just go back to the home page if we deleted it. And then we'll go redirect to the home page. And we'll click save. And I see we have an error. Each child in the list should have a unique ID. Okay, so that's going to be on the page.js file within our website directory. Let's click on it. And right here in the link, let's add a key. And we'll go project.id as the key. And that error goes away. Sorry about that quick redirect. But if we go back to the single project page and we go down to the form that is representing our trash can delete button, let's add in a action inside of the form, and this action is going to be delete project. And if we bring that action in and save the file, once we import it, click on delete, you see we are now redirected back to the add a project below screen. And if we go to our database with Vercel and click on the table, if we click on project, you see that we're not returning any rows. So what I think I want to do, just from a experience perspective, there's a few things we could do, but I'm just going to keep it relatively simple since this is a more of a beginner-friendly project. Let's display a message in the event there aren't any projects within our database. I think, well, we don't necessarily have to have it. We may come back and add it in later just to say that, hey, enter your first project below, since there aren't any projects listed here. But for right now, I won't worry about it. So let's just go ahead and add another project so that we can begin to work on our volunteers. So the first one will go, project name will be Clean the City. And we'll go back to the home page and let's add another project of Wash the Car. Wash the Cars Downtown. And with both, you see we are immediately redirected to the single project page. So we see that it's working perfectly. So now what we want is the ability to see any volunteers that have signed up for this particular project. So first, what we want to do is we want to bring in our volunteers, or we want to gain access to our volunteers, I should say. So for this, let's go up and underneath the closing data for our unique project, or the variable closing data for our unique project. Let's go ahead and create a function named const render volunteers. And we'll go equal. And then for this one, I'll say if data.volunteers.length ENGTH is equal to 0. What we want to do is return a div, and within this div is going to basically just hold a form that's going to allow you to create a volunteer right here, very similar to what we have on our homepage. So within this div, we'll just have a form, and we'll give the form, and let's just be able to see this. So the way we'll pass this information so that it can be seen is listed underneath this nav bar. Let's include a div, and inside of this div, we'll go with the curly brackets and we'll go with render volunteers. and we'll go ahead and call that function. And if we save it, we'll see that cannot read the properties of null of ID. That's fine for right now. So let's give this div a little bit of styling. So I'm going to go with class name of flex, set the direction to column. Let's go with items to the center, and we'll give a little margin top of 4. I think that's basically what we've had all day, so we'll just keep it there. So now within the render volunteers, what we want is, like I said, a form that gives us the ability to add volunteers. So we'll go form and we'll give it a class name of flex, set the width to full, and we'll give it a gap of 4 so that there's a gap between each of the 3 inputs. So the first input is going to be hidden, and this is going to be the ID so that we know where we want these volunteers, what project, the project ID that we want the volunteers to be assigned to. And we'll go with hidden, and we'll set the default value to data.id. And the name of this ID, or the name of this input, is going to be project ID. And this project ID is the project ID that goes with the volunteer. We're just passing it in as a string from the input. A few ways we could have done it, but we're just going to keep it simple. And we'll set the name, like I said, to project ID, and then we'll set its ID to project ID. And we'll include the closing tag and click save. And now what we want is the inputs that we want to include for our volunteers. So we know the first input that we want, and we're going to be using the one from nextui, of course, is for the volunteer's name. So we'll go placeholder of name. Name is going to be equal to name, and we'll set the ID to name. And then underneath that input, we're going to include another input for email. So we'll go placeholder email, and I like to have the little dots. And we'll give this a ID of email and a name of email. And then finally, we'll have one more input. This one will have a placeholder value of phone number, an ID of phone, and a name of phone. If we click save, we see that this information is, we see the inputs are now listed here on the screen. Now within the form, we just need a button. We'll set the type to submit. We'll give it a class name of flex, a gap of 2, set the items to center. And this button, we want to pass in the React FI plus icon. And we'll also include a span with a class name of text small, and we'll say add volunteer. Volunteer, yeah, that's it. And click save. Okay, so now you see that we have that listed there as well. Can I read properties of null ID? Yeah, that's right. Aware of that for right now. Because we deleted that one, so it's not going to be able to read it. Yep. So now that we have the input listed here, what we want to do next is, I'm going to show a message within this. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just show a little message that if, you know what, let's add one more div. So let's copy this entire return statement, the div within it. Let's add another div, and then let's paste that div back within inside of the new div that we created. Now within the second to last closing div tag, let's add another div. And within it, we will set a class name, give it a class name, excuse me, set the text to center, and we'll just say no volunteers. Add your first volunteer today. And click save. And we see it listed there. So now let's give it a little bit of margin top of, let's go with 6. There we go. All right. And now that we have this, let's go ahead and have the ability to create a volunteer. And then once we create a volunteer, let's also render that volunteer onto the page. So first, let's add the action to create a volunteer. So within the actions directory, let's create a file that's going to hold that function, and we'll name it add or create volunteer.js. And let's set the use server at the top. And within this one, let's bring in the imports from create project, because it's going to be pretty much the same. Let's close it out. Let's paste it. And let's create the function named export async function create volunteer. And we're going to pass in form data. And within the create volunteer function, we'll create the variable new volunteer. And we'll go with a try catch block. And we'll go const project. Nope. Go const project ID. Nope, project ID is equal to form data.get. We want to get project ID and make sure the casing matches, and really the casing should match. Let's just make sure what we have listed as the project ID for our volunteer schema. So I'm just going to paste it in just to make sure. I said I've had a long day. I want to minimize as many errors as possible. So I'm going to paste it into this variable, into the get, and I'm also going to go back to the form and paste it into the name and ID that's hidden, just to make sure it's correct. And we'll hit save, close it out. And next I'll go with the name is equal to form data.get name, and we'll create one for a phone. We basically are doing this to get the data that we are submitting from our form, and we'll go with email. Go to form data.get email. And then now with this information, we want to use it to create a new volunteer. So we'll go with new project is equal to await, and we'll go prisma dot, and we want to access that volunteer model, and we'll go with the create function, or the create capability from, or that create option, I should say, from Prisma, drawing a blank right now. And within it, we want to pass in data, and the data we want to pass in is what we are accessing from the form. We want to pass in the name, the phone, the email, and the project ID. And then if we get an error, we'll go console.log new volunteer error. That way we'll know where we're getting it from. And we'll go error, and then we'll go with revalidate. we're going to redirect to the home page, and then we'll go, well, excuse me, revalidate home, and then we'll go redirect there as well. Let's click save. And then now, you know, I actually didn't even use, actually this should have been, instead of project, I should have named this volunteer. There we go. Yep. And click save, close that out. Now I'm going to go back to the project ID page, and inside of this form for the initial return statement, if the volunteer length is 0, I'm going to pass in this action, and I'm going to set the action to create volunteer, and make sure it gets imported from create-volunteer, and making sure we have our name, ID, and phone, email, everything listed. Yep. So now let's test it out. So we'll go with jace at gmail.com, and we'll go 1, 2, 3. We'll go with that. And we'll click add volunteer, and you see we're redirected back to the home page, and we no longer see that message of volunteers being at 0, or we no longer see the message, of add your first volunteer, because we now have a volunteer. And to confirm it, if we go to our database with Vercel, refresh the window, and go to the table of volunteer, you're going to see that the volunteer that we just created is now listed within the database. You see Jace, the email, and the phone, so that's great. So now let's go back and let's display the volunteer within this window. So we have the return statement if the volunteers is 0, but now what we want is the ability to be able to create a volunteer still at this section, but also display a table with the user's information there. Excuse me. So in order to accomplish this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to copy this form, and once we copy this form, I'm going to paste it. Come down to the nav bar. Nope, not on the nav bar content. We have right here, we have render that information. So let's pass it in. I tell you what, let's pass it in. I think I'll go here. And then let me go with, let's see what this looks like. Okay. And yep, that's fine. And then underneath this form, yep, I will go with, I want the ability to see the information in a table. So I'm not going to use the table from NextUI. I think we'll just create our own. So I'll start by adding a div, and within this div, let's go with table. And then inside of table, let's give it a class name, and we're going to add min with a full. Let's go with leading of normal, RMAL. We'll go with rounded as extra large, and we'll go overflow hidden. And then now within the table tag, let's add a table head tag, and we'll add a table row. and each row needs a table head. Let's click save, and I'm just going to add name so I can see it listed there. Okay, so for the row, I'm going to give it a class name and a background of gray 200. Let's click save to see what it looks like. Okay, now for the table head, and I probably should have made this an array, but I'm going to type it out and just copy and paste it. We'll set the padding on the X to 5, the Y to 3. We'll give it a little bit of border, bottom of 2. We'll make the border purple, and I'll set it to 300. Text to left. Set the text to extra small. We'll make the font semi-bold. I like for it to just do it. Let's go FX, fonts, semi-bold. Okay, let's make the text gray 600. Let's go tracking wider, and we'll go uppercase. Let's hit save. Okay, and let's go with a margin top of 8 for the table to give it a little bit of space up top. Okay, now that I have name in place, I'm just going to copy this and add it 2 more times. It'll be name, email, and then phone. And I'm going to add one more for actions, and this will be the ability to delete a volunteer. And this will work. And instead of it being text, I'll leave it as is for right now. So underneath the table head, next we want to display the table body. And what we want to do is display a table row of the volunteers' information in each row of the table. So what we'll do next is we will gain access to it by accessing the data object that we created earlier. So if we scroll down to the table body listed right here, we'll bring in the curly braces for a little bit of JavaScript. And we'll also go, we'll go data.volunteers. Yeah, that should be it. .map. And for each volunteer, we're going to name it volunteer. So I'm going to remove the S. And I don't need to do it. Let's just do 1. And we'll go for each. We want to create a table row. Make sure we give it a key early. Volunteer ID as the key. We'll give it a class name of hover. Background gray. We'll make it 100. We'll go rounded large. Transition. Let's go colors. Duration will be 300. And then we'll close the row. And then for each row, well, on each row, we want table data. The first one is going to be for the name. So we'll go padding on the X of 5, padding on the Y of 5. We'll go border bottom, border gray 200, DG white, text small. And then we will close it, and then we'll put volunteer.name and save the file. And we see it listed as JSON. And we can actually just copy this table data and we'll paste it 2 more times. And instead of name, we'll go with email and then phone. And then we'll hit save. And then last but not least, we want the ability to be able to delete a volunteer. I'm not going to worry about the update for it, but the delete, well, we want to be able to do that. So I'm going to add one more table data, and for this one we'll remove the volunteer name and we're going to replace it with a form. And inside of the form, we don't need a class name for it. We're going to pass in the input. We'll set it to hidden. The default value, keep hitting check, default value will be, for this one to be volunteer.id. And we'll set the name to ID, and we'll include the closing tag. And then we'll also add a button. And this is, if this feels familiar, it's the exact same way that we created the delete button for the project. But inside of the button, we're going to go to the FI trash, and I'm going to set the size to 20. We'll give it a class name of hover, set the text to red, and I think we went with 600. Yep, we'll go 600. And we'll close it, save it, and you see that we have it listed here. And let me remove this. Okay, and I think I want to go, let's go with text center. There we go. I wanted to center the trash can a little bit. Sorry. But what we wanted to do is what we included, excuse me, is just a delete icon, and we're passing in the ID of this volunteer as the value, and we have the ability to delete it. So now the only thing left to do with it is to include the action in order to delete the volunteer. So inside of the actions directory, let's create a file named delete volunteer.js. And we actually can go to delete project, and we can copy that file, and we'll go back to the delete volunteer file. We'll paste in this information, and let's just walk through it to make sure we don't miss anything. So we know that we need the exact same imports. And instead of it saying project, let's remove project and type in delete volunteer. And we're going to pass in form data. We need an ID, and we'll say form data.get, and we're going to get the ID. And we'll then await Prisma. And instead of .project, we're going to say .volunteer. And of course, we want to access delete, where the ID, and we'll console.log any errors, and then we want to redirect back to the home page. So we'll click save on the delete volunteer. Ooh, let me rename that. I'm sorry, I made it dot. That should have been delete dash volunteer. Sorry. Now let's save the file, close it out, and back in our single project page, let's go back to the delete icon that is next to the volunteer name, and inside of that table data, that form, we're going to add the action, and the action that we're going to add is delete project, or excuse me, delete volunteer, and just make sure that it is imported from delete dash volunteer. If we save the file, and let's just click on delete volunteer and see what happens. You see that we are redirected back to the home page. We do not get any errors in the console. If we go to the database and refresh it, we'll see that we have no volunteers, but we still have 2 projects. So just to test it out, we'll go to the Wash the Cars Downtown project, and we'll add our first volunteer. we'll go with, okay, so we see that it is showing on both. So let's do this. Let's remove, I don't want it to show twice if there aren't any volunteers. So let's remove, 1 second. Let's remove the div that we just created that included this information. And it should be around line 44, depending on where you are with your code. Let's just copy that code. And what I want to do is I want to include a return statement in the event under the render method. I meant to do that the first time. So here's the render function listed there. Let's just include return. And inside of the return, let's paste in that div that we just created. And no, that's not it. So let me see something here. Hold on. Let's go back to this div. We'll copy it. And I think I have too many divs listed there. There we go. Let's get rid of this one. Now let's save it. Add your first volunteer today. So now I'm going to paste in this one. Okay. And the first volunteer, we'll just name it Jada. Jada@gmail.com. And we'll just include all nines. And we see that it's not showing the render method, but hold on. I think I didn't include it inside of the create. Let me see here. Sorry about that one. Hold on, let's bring it back to where it was. Okay, so I know that now I needed to render the volunteers. So let me see something here. Let me bring this back, and I'm going to recopy, and then we will, hold on, sorry about this one. Save it. Okay. So it is still showing it there. And then now let's go back right here. Paste it in. Uh-oh. Why is it not showing that data? Hold on 1 second. So I have the if, but it's not. Hold on. You know what? That should probably be this and this, and then paste in that. Hold on. So that, and then let's go return. And then inside the return. Nope, it's still giving me an error. Give me 1 second. No. This. And let's go with this. I'm doing the render volunteers. Yep. Go right here. Let's go with return. Save. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. But now I want to flip. Okay, so hold on. I want the table below the form. Because right now I have the form above the table. Hold up. Here it is. Delete this form, and that should do it. And let me copy this form, and I'm going to place it right above the table in that return statement, and there we go. All right, so that takes care of that, and we'll go with jazz at gmail.com, and number is in the 8s. We get redirected. We see that we have Jazz and Jada there. Inside of Clean the City, we'll add Jack at gmail.com, and we'll go 4s. There we go. 3, 6, 10. See, we go back, and you see we're there. And if we click delete, it's remove and add your first volunteer. Okay. So we have our create, read, update ability with our project. With our volunteer, we went with only the create and the delete ability, but we have a full stack Nextjs project. So I hope that when that concludes today's video, I hope you found it informative and valuable. If you did, feel free to give me a like. If you have any other suggestions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.